So hello, everyone. Sorry for the delays, and there's Bapu just as we start anyway. My name is David Greenwald. I'm the director of the Vanguard. I want to welcome everyone today. We're going to be talking about policing issues. I am going to turn over the moderation of this to our two student editors from the city desk, Jordan Varney and Lauren Smith. Thank you and welcome.
Yeah, hello everyone. Welcome to the Vanguard webinar series where we focus on culture and politics around Davis. As David said, I'm one of your hosts, Jordan Varney, and with me is my co-host and co-editor, Lauren Smith. And we are the student editors of the Vanguard City News Desk. So today, we are lucky to be joined by three guests who are doing influential and important work in Davis. So you all can introduce yourselves and generally your commission, so we can go Cecilia, Emma, Bapu.
Thank you. Jordan, I want to say thank you for having us today. Thank you for covering these important issues in the city of Davis. I'm Cecilia Escamilla-Greenwald, and I serve, this is my second term serving on the Police Accountability Commission. And, you know, I've lived in Davis for a long time. I came here as a student and then left to do some work in St. Louis, Missouri, and then came back. I love Davis a lot. I stayed here to live and make it my home. One area that has needed attention, and I'm happy to see that people are finally paying attention to the issue, and that is racial biases and police accountability. We're very happy that the City Council came together and unanimously decided to form this commission, and I feel honored to serve on it because there's a lot of work that went into, over the last 10 to 15 years, getting this type of a commission up and running. And, you know, a lot of people say, well, it might not be good for police community relations. And actually it is because it helps us see where the strengths are as well as areas that need improvement. And, you know, we have really good commissioners and council members that serve as liaisons. And so I'm happy that we do have this commission, and it's really important. And I just want to say, I encourage people from the public to come to us and share your ideas and your suggestions. We need to hear from different areas of the community all over Davis because we want to know what's working well and what do you suggest to improve those community police relations. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Emma O'Rourke-Powell. I just checked my LinkedIn to get the right date on this, but apparently I've been on the HRC for 5 years, which is wild. February 2016 apparently. Feels like it was just yesterday. Really excited to be here today, and also a strong advocate of being involved in public service. I was in my mid-20s when I joined, so feel free to get on commissions and get involved. We saw this December, council had something like 60 applicants for commission participation. Right, you just have to care. You have to be involved in the community and do your best. Be willing to work hard. You don't have to be an expert necessarily. So I'm always one to pitch getting involved in public service. And in terms of HRC, our charge is to work on thinking about inequality in the city of Davis and thinking about structural ways that we might be able to resolve that we can make recommendations. All a commission can do is make a recommendation to council, but making recommendations about ways to help Davis be more equitable. So we've done things like working on gendered signage in restrooms, public restrooms, to kind of improve that, increasing knowledge of the fact that we're a sanctuary city when that was really topical in early Trump presidency. We host 3 big events each year that are aimed at helping Davis feel more inclusive and welcoming. And our general charge is also to be a place where citizens can come and let us know if they're feeling like they're experiencing something that feels disequitable.
Hi everybody, my name is Bapu Vaitla. I'm on the Social Services Commission. First of all, apologize for being late. Seems like my Zoom competence, scheduling competence has gotten worse and worse as the months roll on. But glad to be here, and thank you for the invitation to the Vanguard and to Jordan and to Lauren and everyone. The Social Services Commission, as most of you likely know, is charged with providing guidance to the City of Davis, to staff and City Council on a broad range of social issues, ranging from affordable housing to mental health, to substance use, to homelessness, to public safety. So we were asked to join this temporary joint subcommittee to kind of bring a public health perspective to this discussion of public safety. Because for us, we realize that, you know, when you're talking about public safety, it's not just crime prevention, it's something broader about how you safeguard and improve the well-being, physical and mental well-being of all Davis's citizens, residents. If you're interested, I can give some more personal background, but basically most of my work has been in international public health. It's only recently that I've gotten involved in domestic policy issues, working mostly around child malnutrition and its interactions with the environment, and environmental change has been the focus in recent years. Thanks.
Thank you all for joining us today. So as the panelists mentioned, we are going to be discussing the temporary joint subcommittee that City Council convened to reimagine public safety in Davis. The temporary joint subcommittee, or TJS for short, consists of members from the Human Relations Commission, the Police Accountability Commission, and the Social Services Commission, all volunteer commissions with the city who aid in specific ways. So the first half of this event will be questions from us about the TJS, and then in the second half, we will be asking audience questions. So the TJS came up with 9 recommendations and a full report to help the City of Davis reimagine public safety as a reaction to and understanding of the local and national events from last summer. So the murder of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, and many others, and the protests for Black lives that followed. So I'm going to drop the report link in the chat if you would like to see it and see the recommendations as we talk about it. And also you can read the full report later on. So to start off with, can you all give us a summary of the goals of the report and what stood out to you in your research for it? And we're going to get into like specific recommendations a little bit later.
It's a big question. I think our goal of the report, I mean, we had many, but ultimately it was to move in a timely manner, to not let this fall by the wayside, while also being evidence-based and community-oriented, thinking about best practices by data around the nation, as well as the shared experiences of individuals in the city, and balancing, being sure to take both into account.
I think also, yeah, that's very good. I think also looking at it as long-term, not just looking at it right now, what can we do right now to address it? It's not just a snapshot response, you know, from the hip. It's saying, just as you mentioned, it's saying, what can we do for our community? Because it might not be the same as what can be done in other communities. And what can we do now that will work, but also look at long-term, what's sustainable and realistic for our city. So I really enjoyed that and enjoyed the opportunity to hear from the various commissions.
Yeah, I'm going to give a little bit more of a controversial answer, maybe. I totally agree with everything Cecilia and Emma said, but I don't think the goals were very well defined, actually, for this exercise. I think that City Council kind of gave a directive that we should advise staff on reimagining public safety. And I think in kind of rough terms, we know what that means, but I think that in terms of specifics, it wasn't super well defined. So I think what ended up happening, the product that we produced with, in some sense, kind of the emerged from the collective experience and competencies of the members that were on the joint subcommittees and the conversations during our meetings and so forth. And so what we have is a document that I think is, you know, tried to focus somewhat in a balanced way on police reform, best practices in police community relationships, and also on the public health and social services aspects of that. So to the extent that, yeah, I mean, I think there are many valid views on how well we achieved those sort of rough goals, but I do think they weren't super well defined.
And I think, I'm glad you mentioned that actually, because it's interesting how we have different perspectives, but very similar. It was defined, but not very well defined. And I haven't even spoken to council members to see if that was done on purpose. I'm thinking maybe it was done on purpose to not limit us. That's what I'm thinking, but I'm not sure. Maybe they wanted us to think outside the box and use our different experiences and the knowledge we've gained to come up with these. But I don't know. I'm thinking that they used it as an opportunity to not put limits and to make good broad recommendations to them. But who knows?
So what was the process in creating this report? And were there specific things you wanted to focus and emphasize in the report?
Yeah, I mean, I think the process, it was jerry-rigged, the process in a way. I think that we knew that we were going to meet together. We didn't know how many times or with what frequency we were going to meet. But I think there was some maybe frustration on the part of the public and the commission itself on maybe revisiting the same ground in the first couple of meetings. But I think also that was sort of natural, is that this was a new experience for many commission members, is to have 3 commissions together in one body. And I think it took us some time to find some legs. So I would say the first couple of meetings were just about hearing from every member of the TJS what they wanted to see happen as an output. And I think we arrived at, it wasn't a foregone conclusion that we do a report. We didn't know if it was going to be a presentation or just a bullet list of recommendations, or even whether there'd be one final document or 3 or more. So I think the process was trying to slowly figure out, well, what can we, I think we learned by the 3rd meeting that we were mostly on the same page. And so one document did seem to make sense. Because of the Brown Act, which if all the public attendees are not aware of, is legislation that prevents a majority of any public body from meeting without public notice. It does, which is great in terms in transparency sense, but also limits the amount of work that can be done between meetings. So we struggled with that, but eventually I think what ended up happening is that the commissions kind of, upon the solicitation of the 3 or 4 commission members from each commission that was on the TJS, gave their input to those 3 or 4 members. And then those 3 or 4 members kind of gave input to their own representatives, and what ended up a writing group of Emma, Judith, Sheila, and myself. So, and then, we took the provisional sort of conclusions from that writing group and brought it back to the meeting of the whole TJS, and then altered the report accordingly. And I think the whole process was, I think we met with the police department twice, and then had 2 instances where Chief Pytel came to our meeting. So we had, I think, 4 kind of extended discussions with the police department. We talked to every council member that was sitting at the time. And we talked to public health providers, private health providers, county officials, et cetera, and tried to bring that information. The people who were doing the interviews tried to bring it back to the meetings, and then went through that cycle again until we arrived at the report.
Sounds like a lot of iterations, which I feel like is important when you're turning out a report this large. If you want to submit questions for the audience portion, feel free to put them in the chat. And we are going to get into specific recommendations now. So that is a link to a slide that has them all listed. So as I reference them, as we reference them, you can kind of follow along. So racism in the Davis Police Department is addressed in your first recommendation. So can you talk about why you wanted to highlight that and how you think those findings tie into recommendation 5, which is reinventing the police community conversation?
Yes, I think, Davis, as good a community as it is, it has a long history of challenges with the police community relations, and it's finally being addressed. There's attempts to have addressed it in the past, but it's finally being addressed and looked at seriously. And we need to look at that and see, and people have made suggestions. A lot of good comments have come from the public. Is it realistic? Can it happen? Can we have portions of the responsibilities that the police department have? Can some of those responsibilities go to social services or to a specialist of some sort when addressing, let's say, calls that they receive about mental health disturbances or what could be a mental health disturbance? And the police have mentioned that there's challenges because they could be going out to a call, it could be a mental health call of some sort, and all of a sudden that individual may have a weapon. And if there's a person who's a social services person, obviously they wouldn't be able to handle that situation. They'd have to have the police there. So can they work together? What's the best way to approach that? And I've been on some police ride-alongs before. It's been a while since I've been on one, but what seemed like was going to be just a small, hey, stop disturbing the peace, they ended up having to take the person in. They had a weapon on them, a knife, and they were under the influence of something, I don't know what. And I was safe, I was in the car, but something like that, for example, on the surface, it seemed like it was a mental health issue of some sort, but looking a little further, it involved maybe some substance abuse of some sort and a weapon. So I think looking at ways that the police could incorporate, social service, a specialist, so that when they are called out, there doesn't have to be somebody with a weapon going to that, an officer, because that could escalate it. So looking at police community relations and how that can be improved, and looking at community bias and socioeconomic factors. Unfortunately, for the population of Davis, the Black community doesn't make up a very large portion, but in Davis, they're arrested at 5 times the population share. Something is wrong there, and we have to look at that. So when we look at police community relations, we need to look at data. We can't just say, no, this doesn't exist, sweep it under the rug. We need to look at the data, and we have the data, and we need to say, what can we do to improve this? And so as part of the report, we're recommending to determine why these racial disparities exist. And we recommended changes on stops. We want that stop data to be collected so that we can see. We had that data many years ago, and it was alarming, but we need that stop data. And how do they collect that stop data so it's not, how do you say it? I guess biased, because they can't ask. A lot of people don't realize this. When they stop somebody, they cannot ask them their ethnicity. It's the police officer that has to mark down if it's a female, a male, other, it could be a non-binary person, but they have to mark it down, and they have to look at what that person's ethnicity might be. And, it's challenging because we have people that are one ethnicity and look another ethnicity. But we do have to have data to work from. So we're looking at changes in the stops and looking at why these disparities exist. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. Yeah, it seems like data is always helpful. And I feel like that's something that you highlight in your report, that we should be collecting data, we should be interpreting it, and then we should be understanding what other cities are using with their data, and if we can take that and apply it to Davis.
Yes.
Which actually kind of leads into our next question.
Bapu, did you want to say anything? I saw that you just unmuted yourself.
Oh, no, I was just getting ready for the next question.
Okay. So in recommendation 3 and in other parts of the report, you talk about evaluation of services, trainings, etc. How would you like to see those implemented? And what do you think the response to evaluation should be?
And who is that question geared towards?
For anyone.
Oh, okay.
Cecilia, I don't know if the PAC has sort of discussed the process of evaluation. I know Judith was involved in some of the training. So
Yeah, we talked about it. I want to give you a chance if you want to talk, and then I can talk. I don't want to hog up the discussion. So if you want to say
oh,
something.
no, please. This seems
Oh.
like something in which the PAC
Okay.
is. Yeah.
Well, there is research that shows the mixed evidence, as the report says, of the impact of trainings. And we need to evaluate those trainings. And we need to also look at how often those trainings are given. I've been at meetings, subcommittee meetings, where we ask about certain types of trainings, and they say, oh yeah, we get that. We get that at the academy, or we get it once a year. Sounds like a lot, once a year, but when we have situations like we currently have, where there's a lot of tensions all over the US between community and police relations, those trainings may need to take place more often. And then looking at it from the other side too, when they go to trainings, that means somebody is not working. It could be during an off day maybe, but we don't have that big of staff anyways in the police department. So we need to look at how can we have those trainings, the ones that are needed, more often. How can we have them more often? And how can we do it so that it does not negatively impact them being out in the field, doing the job they want to do to protect our community. But we need to look at those trainings and how often they're delivered. I think we need to look at new officers too. We talked about that. Sometimes people have brought up there's officers that don't live in the community, and there's reasons they don't live in the community because they don't want to live in the community where they work, because sometimes they report that they get harassed. Okay, we understand that. But then there's the other side. If not living in a community sort of removes you from having that empathy and wanting to have positive change in your community, how do we address that? Because sometimes people feel, well, if they don't live in the community, they really aren't vested. They don't care about what happens in Davis. And so we need to look at that. Also, we need to apply framework and evaluation and look at public safety programs, not just in Davis, but because we're a university town, we need to collaborate with the university and see what works, what programs are the same, community police programs, and we need to collaborate, because there's some people that have been stopped by UC police and they'll say one thing and it's different with the City of Davis police. So there's concern over that, just making sure that there's collaboration, so that there's best practices being put to use. But I think what we need to look at mostly is, we talked about it, the trainings, how they work well, and areas where there can be improvement. And most importantly, we need to look at data. We need to look at data. We can't bypass the data, because the data tells us a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, Jordan, I see that there's Anush. There's a question in the chat that relates to this, so maybe I'll just. One
ahead.
thing is that as far as I know, the DPD trainings, I'm not sure actually if there's been evaluations or not, but what we were saying in the report is not that the implicit bias trainings for the DPD in particular are ineffective, but rather that the literature shows that there's been very mixed results for implicit bias trainings in general for police departments and otherwise other institutions. And that's a fact that one can deal with. But the more interesting thing is, I think, that there are enabling conditions to increase the potential impact of these trainings. And some of them have to do with things like officer rest, just making sure that officers aren't working overly long shifts, that that also when encounters happen, that both sides have a sense of lowered risk, when our minds are kind of, what the literature sort of seems to show is that when our minds are kind of in this heightened state of anxiety, the implicit biases are expressed outwardly. So the enabling environment is really important. One thing that was interesting in the literature about trainings is that procedural justice trainings do seem to have an impact, at least in this, in a study that was published in a prestigious journal and had a really large sample size, et cetera. So it's an intriguing finding that even without perhaps creating enabling conditions, certain kinds of training can be effective. And to understand why is important, I think, to maybe redesign other trainings along those same principles.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I've read that one too. And also, oh, somebody's asking a question. If they want you to clarify what procedural justice is.
Sure, yeah. It's basically that you're carrying out the letter of the law as closely as possible. The law stipulates a certain kind of procedure that also includes considerations of how does one carry out procedures in a way that's as racially unbiased or unbiased in any other sense as possible. And to make sure that the public also knows their rights is part of what procedural justice entails. So, and I think, from what I've read in the literature, the speculated reasons why these trainings might be more effective without even enabling conditions is that it sort of doesn't place anyone in a defensive posture immediately. It seems to be about enhancing skills, knowledge of the law, how one comports themselves, versus it is intuitive to imagine that something like an implicit bias training, even not even evaluation, might provoke some kind of defensiveness, and is kind of the success of which is maybe contingent on pre-existing attitudes to how open you are to the training. And that was one paper actually did say that officers who had a priori attitude of really being motivated to be in the training and to recognize they themselves have acted in a biased manner in the past, the training had a greater impact. So, which is not a shocking conclusion, but it is, I think, important to note that so-called sort of soft factors like pre-existing attitudes towards the issues will influence your quantitative appraisal of the impact of the trainings.
Yeah, and
Right.
just to add briefly to that, one of the pieces of recommendation 5 includes being in constant contact with the police department themselves. And so a piece of this, right, it's about understanding what's happening for them. And we've heard reports that officers in Davis are feeling very overworked and stressed and anxious, and all of those can play in. And so, there are reasons to be upset with inequity in the way that policies are being implemented. And at the same time, we need to kind of meet individuals where they are. And in order to do that, we need to know where they are.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, Emma, because some people don't realize, a lot of the public, and maybe, we need to do more outreach and let people know that exists. But when somebody files a complaint, if it's not a type of criminal complaint or a complaint of a police officer, or something where they've broken the rules or the MOU, where it's maybe they felt that the officer mistreated them, looked at them in a bad way, spoke to them in a sort of a threatening way, the member of the public can request to have mediation. And I was a part of that committee that set that up and worked on it for over a year. We had some really very, very deep discussions about the history of police community relations. It was a few of us that were meeting every month with the police as we put this program together. So if somebody has a concern or complaint, they can request to have from our city auditor to have interaction with that officer who may have, they feel mistreated them. And in that dialogue, because it's mediation, they both parties have to agree and it is confidential. But in that dialogue, the member of the public gets to express themselves and help that officer understand how they felt they were being mistreated, rude to them, maybe biased towards them because of how they looked. And then similarly, I can't even talk. Similarly, excuse me, the officer can share with the member of the community how they felt. And so having that dialogue and coming to an understanding, it sounds like, oh, okay, does that really work? But we have had positive results from that because they're opening up and saying, here is how I feel and here's what we can do to improve that community police relations. And I think it's going to start with those one-on-one discussions and also group discussions, but sometimes the one-on-one discussions. But a lot of people don't know about that. And, please spread the word. If somebody wants to have a discussion with somebody, they can make that request. So thank you for bringing that up, that recommendation.
And just to add one thing, I quickly Googled procedural justice to make sure I wasn't giving it over. But, I think it is interesting what I see here, which is that there are, it seems like, various ways to define it, but the four central principles that keep cropping up are this idea of treating everyone with dignity and respect and giving citizens voice during any encounter, conveying neutrality in decision-making, and also conveying this idea that one's motives are trustworthy. So again, it's a very relational thing. It's saying that it's not that there's something wrong with this person or that person, but this relationship is kind of broken, but there are norms that we can strive towards to sort of create trust and legitimacy.
And Morgan asked in the chat, does this need to be built up? Does the dissemination exist for gathering and disseminating, evaluating, training? Let's see, is the capacity for appropriate data gathering and dissemination exist already in the DPD, or does it need to be built up in order to evaluate fully? It exists, but it definitely needs to be built up. Definitely needs to be built up. And that's an area we can work on.
And one thing, I don't know that I answered Anusha's question very directly if people are looking into alternatives. And I think that, there are a lot of reforms that are needed, and trainings in isolation will not have the desired impacts that we're looking for. Trainings are a supportive measure. They're one piece of the toolkit. Insofar as the trainings themselves are concerned and their impacts, then it's about, I think, like Cecilia said, frequent and high quality evaluation and somehow feeding that back into a process of redesign.
So broadening our scope a little bit, we've been talking about, evaluations within the police department and the data that has come that we have from there, what that we want to see in the future. So in recommendation 9 in the introduction, you talk about bold solutions to systemic racism. So in a larger sense, how does systemic racism affect our city and how can we dismantle it? And what would you like to see the city do in regards to that in the future?
Well, I'll let Cecilia and Emma speak to the police aspect of that. Is that certainly they have much more expertise than I do, but I would like to speak to the social services part of that. Is that public safety reform is one piece of dismantling racism, of one piece of anti-racism, and police reform is a subset of public safety as well. So I think it's important, for very visceral reasons, we're all focused and motivated for understandable and good reasons. We're all motivated by the opportunity to reform police departments as a means of fighting racism. I think the shocking images that we saw not only last year, but for years, for generations, really, I mean, the work is not done. At the same time, I think that affordable housing, for example, for me is a very, who has access to housing in Davis is a strong reflection of systemic racism, and this interacts with poverty, it interacts with public safety, et cetera. But to answer the question broadly, Jordan, I hope that the passion that we have for public safety reform right now is sustained. And I hope that passion is also, if our central concern is racism, I hope that passion extends with equal fervor to issues of housing and access to healthcare, not least mental health care as well, among other issues.
Yeah, I can't say it any better than Bapu did, except to add, from my perspective, the piece that always stands out to me is racism is acutely visible in policing because we have these clear incidents, typically on a national stage, but occasionally here in the region as well, of the ways in which people's lives are disproportionately taken from them because of their race. So it's a easy lens or an easy window into this issue. However, the issue is so much bigger than that. And so here in this report, we have focused on the police and policing reform, right? Recommendation 9 is all about reimagining public safety, but kind of a key question within that is, where does the police department sit and how can we do that in a forward-thinking way? Ultimately, though, when I think about this issue broadly and with hope, it very much aligns with what Bapu just shared, which is how are we making sure that everyone has access to housing, to food, to healthcare, to services, to community? How do we make sure that people feel included? Intangible things like being welcomed. HRC, we spend a lot of time thinking about how welcoming a community feels. Things that like redlining and housing policy, not just making sure there is low-income housing, but what about the policies that exist today, right? So there's so much work to be done everywhere, and I think policing, definitely needs attention, but I wouldn't ever want to see attention falter on other areas as well.
Very good points, Emma. Both Emma and Bapu make excellent points. It's policing cannot be isolated. It's only one component of all the other issues that they both mentioned: housing, healthcare, mental health, access to mental health, food right now, food insecurity, especially right now as we're going through, COVID-19. Access to, we're fortunate to live in a city like Davis where people can go get tested, but everybody's sitting patiently waiting for the opportunity to, to get a vaccine. And then we look at education. I mean, the irony here, right now we're in a unique situation because of COVID-19, but there's disparities there too. Here we live in a university town. It's a wonderful town that prioritizes education, but there are the haves and the have-nots. And so what impact do those issues have on housing, food accessibility, shelter, clothing, and how does that all play in with community police relations? Because if you serve on the police force and you have bias and you may not even realize it, there could be somebody that, I've looked on, this is one of the discussion groups, where people were saying there's a lot of homeless folks over here in South Davis. And it was even there was a discussion, I think it was a city council meeting. I was appalled at some of the things people were saying. I got to be honest. Some people said, well, you can put them on a bus and send them. They're human. They're human. We can't discriminate against people just because they're poor or because they're unhoused. So like Emma said, how do we help people understand that people need to feel welcomed? People that are different than us need to feel welcomed. How do we help people feel welcomed, especially during these times? And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work that we're looking at: the police, community relations, again, mental health, social services. That's why it's important. And I was happy to see all these commissions coming together to address these issues. And these are just recommendations to council, but I applaud council because this is a lot of work they're going to be doing. But when they make the recommendations, it's going to require not just those on the commission, but members of the public to say, hey, I'm willing to help. Here's what I can do. You know, it might be a little piece. It's okay. But we're going to need to, as a community, step up and help this plan, or whatever plan, you know, city council approves and moves forward. We're going to need everyone's help because it's going to take everyone's help to make our community better.
I'm sorry I want to tag on, and I'm sure you have other questions. I apologize. I think you reminded me, Cecilia, of listening to public comment, I don't know, December 1st or December 15th, one of those days. And there was a lot of support for the report that we had put together, but there were, I think, something like 22 comments that of the 150 that were dissenting. And so much of that to me felt fear-based, and it felt very wealth disparity based. And it felt like it was kind of a lack of empathy. And so I think Davis in particular, because of these structures, these policies enacted in the city to prevent growth, right? To literally bar people from living with us. We've created some serious wealth inequality within the city. And we talk about that on a national level with Occupy, you know, and things of that nature. But if there's a place to be looking for that, it's definitely right here in our own backyards. And so many of those comments felt like people had forgotten that these individuals who are unhoused are literally our brothers and our sisters, and instead kind of wanted to otherize and have just feelings of xenophobia, right? And so there's so much work to be done one-on-one, and there's good research about the power of each of us in our own circles of influence having these conversations, right? I think about conversations with my parents or people that are my parents' age, or friends at work or things of that nature, you know, not hiding from these conversations and really inviting people to think critically about the way that their vote in the city on issues like having more housing, and has such an impact, not just on, you know, the price of their own home should they ever choose to sell it, but also on humanity and on these individuals that are here in our town with us. So anyway, I get a little too excited about it, so I'll stop talking.
Thank you. Those were all very helpful and informative answers. Yeah, I think that something that really helped me was when someone was like, well, the unhoused folks that live in your town are residents of Davis and they are your neighbors. And I was like, yeah, they totally are. And so we should treat them with the respect that we treat our other neighbors. And I think that going back to what Bapu said, systemic issues are exactly that. They're systemic. So they show up in a lot of ways. They're really ingrained because that's how in the past, you know, people exploited other people. And so I think that really diving in and understanding how they are in each of the structures we have in our city is important. And I think that one of the reasons that it's helpful to focus on the police first is, like Emma said, that you do see these really graphic examples in the news, and also in our town, there are some of the few residents that carry weapons. And so you want to really make sure that the people who have weapons in your town are the ones that are at the top of their game, that are addressing their bias and things like that. So that leads into my next question about recommendation 9. So what do you feel is important about having unarmed personnel responding to nonviolent service calls? And what do you think is important about having those responders in a department separate from the DPD?
I think it's imperative. I think it's imperative. weapons, I know it's a person's right to own a, a registered weapon. But I think it's important, I think the majority of us, not everybody, but agrees that when you have a weapon, and especially when it's a person in uniform, and it's no offense to police officers, I understand that, that's their profession, but that makes people nervous, and it kind of escalates the situation. But I do understand that there are situations where, there's people with weapons, and so they need to try to get control of that situation. But when possible, I think if there is not a weapon, and if the situation can be approached from a person or a standpoint of, nonviolence, it could be a nuisance, code violation, traffic stop. It's best to come from a place of compassion and understanding, or helping them understand how, whatever it is they did violated, or maybe they didn't violate anything. Maybe it is perceived that way, whoever called it in. But maybe, I had to call in, I had to make a call, and, I'm cautious because you don't want it to just, oh, it's gonna, be a bad situation. I even mentioned that there was, we were putting gas in, and there was somebody near the highway, and their family was trying to keep her from running from them. It became very clear that she was trying to run onto the highway. So obviously that was a mental health issue, perhaps a suicidal issue. And I called 911 and let them know they needed to get somebody over there. But I stated, this appears to be a mental health situation. So I don't, it's not like a dangerous, like she's going to harm somebody, but it appears that she may harm herself. So I think you need to get some mental health professionals here to help. And they said several people had called in too, and they said, thank you for the phone call, for alerting them and letting them know, giving more detail. And I don't know, what happened, but I believe they were able to help that individual, but there were people trying to keep that person. So in a situation like that, you can imagine having a weapon is only going to escalate that. And I think that we need to look at that model and see how that can be implemented so that someone with a weapon doesn't have to be at each and every call, but be available in the event that, it necessitates that. But I think we should look at it. It's worked in other communities, and I think we should look at the data on how it has worked, how they implement it, and what the outcomes are, and see if we can do something similar. Thank you.
Yeah, and I have a personal story actually to relate about this. It's kind of a story that still makes me feel a little ashamed, but it's apropos in this context, so I'll share it. It was last year, pre-pandemic. I was driving along in Davis, and I saw an elderly lady who seemed to be struggling with a shopping cart. And so I stopped and said, do you need a ride? We can put your cart in the back, et cetera. So we did. I took her back to her place. And along the way, she sort of started talking about suicidal intent, just that she was just very fed up with life and just thought of ending it every day, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously I got more and more concerned, didn't know what to do, right? It was just, and it was short. It was like a 10-minute drive. Dropped her off. And then after I dropped her off, I called the county and tried to figure out if we could just have a mental health check.
Mhm.
And I tried a couple of different agencies or whatever they call them, departments in the Health and Human Services Agency. And they kept saying, call the police. Like, this is a situation where you should call the police.
Wow.
And they do mental health checks. So also there was a situation where I was leaving town the next day. So I just kind of wanted to handle it quickly. And so, I called the police and let it go at that. And it turned out I was like offline actually for a few days. So, but then when I got back offline a few days later, I had a series of very angry voicemails from this elderly lady. Like she'd told me that she'd had a lifetime of terrible experiences with the police, that these police showed up at her door, and she was upset at me, upset at everyone. And so like I made it was a nice thought, but it was actually I made the situation worse. And part of the problem there is that we just didn't have a specialized first responder for mental health who is trained in um, not provoking fear and anger and frustration in folks. And not that all police officers just do that as a matter of course, but it's hard, I
Yeah.
think, for people who've had a lifetime of difficult experiences with the police, and just to be around an armed individual is hard. So that's the anecdotal answer. But so I'll just say, and just to link to Matt's question and maybe Morgan's question in the chat box as well. First of all, Matt, just to give a very direct answer to your question, I had not heard about the Sunnyvale model. I don't know if others on the subcommittee had. And that's one of the challenges of this process, is there's just so much going on that so thank you for that. And I'll look into that model. It sounds like an analog that's apropos for Davis in terms of size of the city and conditions, et cetera. But there's a lot of innovation happening. And to link this to Morgan's question about budgeting, you know, the reason police are handling all of these various kinds of emergencies and the reason why services are siloed is just historical inertia, right? I mean, there are reasons why police forces were created in the first place that have to do with white supremacy, et cetera. But in terms of municipal government and who handles emergencies, it's just a ad hoc historical process of cobbling together services. It's not optimized, is my point. It's not as if we've said, okay, what's the best way to do this? And this is how municipal government should do it. And in fact, municipal government was doing much of social service provision, which we're saying in this report is essential to prevent the need for armed response at all in California, very much until recently. Counties, sort of the feds and the state government provide the fundings and set the policy. The funding flows to counties, and counties set up the programs. That has its advantages, but increasingly, the reality that municipalities are running up against is that these problems are contextualized. The reasons why homelessness or mental health problems exist in Davis is not the exact same as Sacramento or wherever else. And so, it's important to learn from other cities, but it's a new thing for a given municipal department to figure out how to navigate the tangle of federal and state and county services and figure out how they can play an important role in all of this. Again, to answer Morgan's question more directly, there's a subsidiary or attendant problem of how does the city raise funds for the expansion of a social safety net, which they need to. I'm not going to get into that issue, but it's something worth bearing in mind about, like, and this links to what Emma was saying, is, it's not trivial to have your catalytic converter stolen, right? It's thousands of dollars, and for some families that could be catastrophic, right? But it's just true that we can't afford higher parcel taxes. It's just true that we can't afford a parcel tax for more social services, and that we may not have other options. So I don't know. I think that's what it means to be progressive, is sometimes realize that you have to contribute a bit more to the communal pot if our values are going to be manifest, actually. So.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I wanted to read Matt Williams' comment. And Matt Williams said that the City of Sunnyvale's Public Safety Department is an example of a fully integrated public safety department with personnel cross-trained as police officers, firefighters, and emergency medical technicians, allowing the department to efficiently and effectively provide police, fire, and emergency medical services seamlessly to the community. And has such an integrated public safety model been considered by the Joint Commission? We made the recommendations, not that one, but we made recommendations to council. But that's something that, we may want to look at and see how that would work here,
And
but
one of the challenges we ran into in this report was, being aware that we were going to be limited in time, and ultimately for us, right, the goal was to put something before council in December for them to react to, with the caveat that it wasn't going to be perfect or comprehensive. And so, to your point, Cecilia, I think recommendation 9, which is we want the city to reimagine public safety, like the Sunnyvale piece, that should be now on council's docket, right? We didn't say the city should build this specific department and pull these people over here and hire these 6 people and reorganize your budget in this way. We said, you, the city, we can advise, but ultimately you, the city, need to commit to a vision of reimagined public safety and do more, right? Continue the research, find places like Sunnyvale and add that into the mix and consider all of that. So I think there's a piece here of, it's hard because we know we want change. It's not good enough yet. We need it to happen. And at the same time, there has to be a little bit of slowness to make sure the process is robust and complete, right? And so we want to be oriented towards the product and have an outcome and fix it all. But because it's so complex and you pull on this string and you pull on this string and you pull on this string, and you figure out that mental health care is related to property taxes, is related to policies in city government, is related to how hospitals treat mental health crises, right? It's all so intertwined that it's gonna take iterations over years for us to get to a place where it's significantly better. And the key is to keep that momentum up and to keep pushing, and let's iterate over and over and over and over again, so the quality of our city and the quality of the community just continues to grow and grow and grow.
And just to be clear, I'm looking at Matt's comments in the chat box, and to be clear, I am not saying that we should stop doing something with because it's hard. No, I absolutely think, Matt, first of all, I'd like to say that, I think that we should look at the Sunnyvale model and, look at great ideas like that are working, regardless of whether it implies much more budgetary investment or more difficult, political risk taking. I mean, all of this stuff, any kind of meaningful change is going to require some hard work. And so I'm not at all diminishing sort of Matt's suggestion to look into Sunnyvale.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, very good point.
And we should maybe also mention, we don't have a formal role anymore. We, as the commission should consider, unfortunately, unless I missed something at the most recent city council meeting, our charter was to produce some thoughts, and we did that.
We did that, and that's it.
And we now have our normal commissions, and perhaps we'll be invited back in. And I think obviously this is something we're very passionate about, but it was a bounded project, and the bound ended in December.
Yeah, we can let them know, the council know that we're interested in being involved, but we have to wait for council to come back with recommendations. But you're right, Emma, that was it. They gave us a charge and we did it. And so now we wait for them.
And this speaks to, I think, Julia's question also in the chat box. Emma and Cecilia just answered the question, but this is an extension. Commissions are weird. I've been on a commission now only for 1.5 years, and I don't really, and this is maybe the way that it's supposed to be. I'm not sure, but there's no precisely specified procedure for how commissions come up with ideas or recommendations to pipeline to policy. Right? I mean, in certain cases, like the Planning Commission, they're very sort of strict roles. There's kind of a veto type function there, or approval type function. For most commissions, though, and most issues, we are simply advisory boards, and it's at times it honestly can be frustrating, especially when you put in a lot of work and you sort of hand it over to staff, and staff takes it to council, and then we're not elected, so obviously this, I'm not saying that we should have legal authority in any sense or policymaking authority, but honestly, it is sometimes frustrating the ambiguity of our role in policymaking. So to answer Julia's question, I don't think we know what our role is going to be, and I don't think we know for sure how to be effective within the bounds that we're given. I don't.
I was going to say what you said is right on, but we also need to remember, as members of the public stepping away from the commission, we can always provide input to city council and on, if they're considering some policy changes. It's important that you, as members of the community, write letters, send emails, make public comments, work together collectively as a group. And we, as members of the commission, can step aside and work as an individual from the public to encourage council to make certain changes. I think some changes have come about this way. I mean, this is how we got the Police Advisory Commission going, because a lot of people, over the years, it's been 10 years in the making. It didn't just happen, overnight in the last few years. And we had a city council with an open ear, willing to listen and make those changes. And so that's how it happens. So Matt Williams, said it's not just council. I don't know what he meant by that, but I'm thinking it might mean that they make the policy changes. They have the budget, but it requires input and work from members of the community. And that's why I want to thank you all. I know there's groups out there that are working on these issues. And I want to thank you all for taking the time to work on these important issues.
And I think that's one of the special features of a small size city like us, 70,000 people.
Small 70,000.
I was looking at the Yolo County election. I mean, it is. I was looking at the Yolo County election results from 2020. Like the nerd that I am, and I was looking at how 500 votes were the difference in some of these races, right? In terms of city council or in terms of some of the measures that were on the ballot. 500 people.
201
I called a friend and she was like, "Are you drunk?"
201 votes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I called my friend and she was like, "Are you drunk?" I was like, "No, I'm not drunk, but I'm so beside myself." Like, I was like, "We know 500 people. Like we knew that many people." I was like, "We could have knocked on doors," right? So I think thinking about, it could be helpful to have clear structure and clear processes as to, this goes here, goes here, goes here. And at the same time, kind of by not having such clarity, it really does create this space where if there's something that you're passionate about, and ideally if you and your 500 closest friends are passionate about it, like you bring that forward, like it's probably going to happen, right? That squeaky wheel is going to get oiled. And I think that's why I'm always so excited about people applying to commissions and getting on these groups, because especially young folks, like we have a different network than necessarily what city council has, right? The people that they're hearing from, and there's a little bit of an echo chamber effect, right? And so being able to say, I'm hanging out with a different demographic, and these are the themes that I'm hearing, and like these are the changes we need to make as a city, that can happen. And changes can happen. I am suddenly sounding very pro-government, but each of you here today, all 30 participants, if you want to, you can make a change in the city. So stay hopeful.
No, Emma, you make excellent points. And I want to encourage, I was a student at UCD, I'm an alum, I was a co-founder and former president of College Democrats, and we were very active at that time. But boy, the College Dems, the way they're active now, oof, they just blew us out of the water. But it's exciting to see people involved that way. And students, please remember, don't think that, oh, I don't have a voice, my vote doesn't count. It sure does. In Woodland, there was an election, a school board, I think it was decided by 10 votes. And there's others that have been decided by 100 votes. You have the ability to make change. You have the ability to run for city council. I would love to see a student run for council at some point. That hasn't happened for a long time, where we've had a school board member be a student from UCD. Let's face it, if UC Davis did not exist, our city would be very different. So I would like to see more collaboration and cooperation between the university and the city. It makes sense. I wanted to ask, I don't know if we can answer one of these questions. Somebody asked earlier, about what can we do to get more data on profiling stops. I believe I saw that somewhere. Profiling stops. What was that? Where was that? Where did it go? How do we get good data on traffic stops to prevent racial profiling? We're working on that. David asked that, David Greenwald. The commission is working on that. And I anticipate we're going to maybe have some information at the next meeting, not certain, but that is something that we've requested. We want better data for stops, and we've requested it. So we'll see how that gets implemented, and we'll keep everyone posted on it.
Wow. Thank you so much for all of your discussion and sharing your personal stories. Bapu, if you want to chime in before we switch to audience questions or more of them.
Oh, I just wanted to go back because Nora had a question. Nora Lewin had a question way back when, and I don't think we responded to it. So I just wanted to make sure that was covered. Her question was, does anyone know whether Davis had covenants against selling property to persons who are not white, and whether there are any plans to discover that? If not, I don't know the answer to the question. Perhaps others do. I want to use that to just bring it to go back into your earlier question about racism as well. I think part of what's happening now in America is just realizing that the present is incrementally generated. I mean, the past creates the present, right? And I don't, like in Davis, we're so focused on this present identity of the liberal, environmentally conscious, blah, 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 whatever city, big university. I don't know the history of racism in Davis, the deep history, as it pertains to Latinx people, as it pertains to Native people, as it pertains to African Americans. I know that there are cities across the United States that are now investigating that history and trying to remedy. Nora refers to selling of real estate, so redlining practices, et cetera. It would be good to have a community conversation in Davis about our past history of systemic racism, as well as acknowledging, in order, I would say, to more clearly acknowledge and analyze the issues of the present. And there are even some cities, Asheville, North Carolina, who knows what the actual operationalization of this will be, but they recently passed reparations legislation. And there's pros and cons. You don't want to let the federal government and the state governments off the hook, but also municipalities can do a lot towards investigating what we did wrong as a means to think, are there meaningful ways in which we can make reparations?
Pooh, we'll have to talk. Yeah, our wonderful city does have a lot of history in that area. And Nora, I can't be 100% sure, but I think I'm about 90% sure that did exist in Davis. Off the top of my head, I can't remember, but I do know that many of the streets, the popular streets in Davis, are named after folks that may have provided a lot of money to the city, but may have not had good relations with folks that were not of the majority race. Let's say it like that. And I remember when I served on the Human Relations Commission. Oh, you did? Okay. To expand community outreach. Oh,
I don't know if my internet's glitchy, Cecilia, or if you're. I'm sorry. I feel like I keep talking over you. I apologize.
Oh yeah. Okay. Housing discrimination. Yeah, I see.
What I'm trying to. In brief, yes, there was redlining in Davis. As there was in many cities in California.
Yeah, many cities. And as, what I got to say is that, I know Davis, like many other cities, are now looking at their history and saying, wow, what can we do to address this so that this doesn't continue? But it's a good question that you asked, Nora, because it's important to look at history and see where this came from. And the university has some of this too. There's interesting stuff about the university, but we can continue to make positive changes. It's interesting to learn about our cities that we live in and love, and see what was good about them and what wasn't, and what we can change. But it's good to have a good community discussion. I think it was Emma. Were you the one that said that, or who said it would be a good idea to have? Oh, it was Julia. I'm sorry, Julia Shaw. What efforts are being done to expand community outreach to impacted communities to ensure that we deliver the best, most needed services related to education efforts for residents who might be reacting from a place of fear? That's a very good question. I made a suggestion. Well, everything's different right now with COVID. All of our meetings are online, but I suggested that we have our meetings in different areas of the community to welcome people, from South Davis, North Davis, East Davis. Even though we have public meetings and anybody can attend, sometimes when a meeting is in your area and it's just easier for you and there's efforts to reach out to people that live there, they might feel more welcomed and might want to participate more. So any suggestions you have, please forward them to us. But it would be good to do that, and also to expand the Coffee with the Cop program to have people feel comfortable coming to talk to police, to get to know them, and know members of the community too, people from the commissions, so that they can apply to commissions if they're interested, and we can help them apply. Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't know if there was other outreach efforts. I think that the HRC is working on community outreach, or
Sure. Are you curious about community outreach efforts? Is that?
Sorry, that was the question in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm not following too closely.
That's
the
okay.
chat questions. So yes, HRC, that's generally our big picture vision, is to be a place where community can come, and then from a structured approach, making sure that we, in this instance, continue to keep the conversation open. We're designing that process. Please come to those. There's also an additional process on top that's very structured, run through some collaborators at UC Davis, that's going to specifically be looking at policing. They do public input processes, public deliberation processes, and they're approved to work with the city. So that's going to be really awesome. It's not going to be kind of as broad and expansive. It's going to be structured, but they tend to get good data about possible specific tactical policing reforms. So that'll be really an important process as well. And then, yeah, I think keeping the conversation more open is always better. I need to go back and listen to City Council from Tuesday and see where they landed, but there will be continued multiple ways to be engaged and to continue the feedback process, with an eye towards making sure it's accessible as well. So given that some may not have access to Zoom or computers, that's going to be a piece of the process.
We did have one question in the chat from Emily, and she's asking, in regards to comments from the public, how does the criticism affect you? And do you find it encouraging to see how active and passionate the public can be on those topics, or discouraging at times?
That's a great question. I'd love to feel that question. Not an easy question though. Yeah, it's definitely at times very inspiring, and it feels like the public has your back, or the public is calling you out on things that you deserve to be called out on, and you could improve. And in the moment, sometimes you're sort of defensive when there's criticism, but I think in almost all instances, it's felt positive to kind of reflect on that feedback and knowing that it's coming from this place of wanting to fight racism, create
Yeah.
an anti-racist society. Having said that, I will say that, what struck me in addition to the overwhelming support for the report, which I think we all appreciated at public comment, it struck me that it just did seem like there were two polarized groups, which obviously reflects America today. But I just wonder about whether it's possible to, maybe the answer is no, but whether it's possible to at the same time say, look, losing a catalytic converter could be just catastrophic, and
Yeah.
say that armed response to everything could be catastrophic, and just figure out whether both things can be true at the same time and then move forward. But it's just, I say that, but it's just like our democratic process is not, it's set up for oppositional expression, it's set up for you say your views as strongly as you can in the short public forum time you have, your 2 minutes or whatever. And so, because you have a short amount of time, you want to say them as passionately, you're not like wanting to convey all the nuance of your soul, right? You just want to make sure your message is clearly heard. But that doesn't lend itself, it lends itself to winner take all politics, either piece of legislation is passed or reform is made or not. And it's not to say that they're not right and wrong things. They're definitely right and wrong things. But I wonder about whether it's time, especially on a municipal level, to figure out how to set up new models of participatory policymaking. And maybe that begins, and this also plays into the whole conversation about what is a commission? What the hell is the commission doing? What am I doing? Just that there are participatory budgeting models that have been tried in this and other countries, and they have sort of mixed records of success. But along with that, I wonder if there's ways in which to draw more people into the policymaking process at the same time, quote unquote, educating them or informing them on various sides of an issue and just the nuances of an issue, and to kind of hash things out away from just, well, not away from, but in the public eye, but not just at city council meetings and not just in backroom meetings between party X and party Y, like between staff and blah, 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 or whatever,
Yeah,
I don't know what that model looks like, but I would love to see us just think as Davis, a progressive city wanting to move forward on the next iteration of democracy, how do we create participatory policymaking systems?
I don't want to oversell the value of this UC Davis group that's going to be working with us. I think ultimately they're going to maybe engage with a total of 80 people tops, and they do these focus groups. So I don't want to say it's the silver bullet or the panacea. That's not true. However, I think it's going to be exciting to use that as a pilot, because they've shared that when they've done these public deliberation processes before, they'll invite 15 to 20 people or 10 to 15 people into a room for 2 or 3 hours, Zoom room in this instance. And they'll find frequently that the opinion stated at the beginning and where that person lands by the end of the hours together has moved, right? And that's a rare thing in the modern era. It's unusual on these issues to see movement. And it comes out of kind of the structured way that they're able to facilitate these conversations. So I think if there's something to keep an eye on and see how it goes and see if we can borrow and bring it forward, that is a specific pilot that I think is really going to be worth paying attention to.
That'll be very interesting. When does that begin?
I believe they hope to start in January. Again, I should watch the city council meeting to see where it landed, but I'll try to get up to date on that before the HRC meeting in a couple weeks.
Thank you. Tia Will had mentioned something that is interesting, and I hope council, as they look at our recommendations, we want to make sure to get this to them. She says, and she's a retired doctor, retired OBGYN, she would encourage the commission to look at models that include both responders who are trained in social service and mental health, but also with a background in basic medical care, as some situations may involve conditions that are not typically labeled as mental health. So that's true. Not all conditions will be mental health conditions. And so, yeah, I think we just need to be open to looking at new models. And I'm sure there are other cities that are doing this and they've had successes and maybe have had to make some adjustments, but I think it's going to require some research and looking at data and seeing what has worked and what hasn't. And I'm excited. I think we have a city council that is open to these adjustments or changes. And so it'll be interesting to see, what they recommend. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of it. But we want the community to please stay involved. That's very important. Very, very important.
All right, so that is our time today. Thank you so much to our panelists for joining us and having such a great conversation on this really important topic. For the audience, thank you for coming out. We will be posting this video in the next day or so on the website, on the Vanguard website. If you want to keep following the developments of the recommendations over time, we publish articles in the City News Desk every week about politics in Davis, and Jordan is going to pop our social media links into the chat for you guys. And then, like Cecilia said, you can attend these meetings live, you can participate in them through public comment and find all of that information on the city's website. So thanks again for everyone for coming, and we hope you have a really great day.
Thank you, Lauren and Jordan and the Vanguard. We really appreciate it.
Thanks everyone for setting this up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Bye.
joining us.